here we are. This is Sex, Love, Psychedelics, and I'm your host, Dr. Kat. Bringing you psychosexual conversations that will leave you intellectually turned on and hungry for more.
I guess my first question for you will be, how I have so many questions, but let's start.
I know. Well, yeah. I want to know more about Kat so the world knows too.
Yes, and I think that like maybe we can unpack our own personal stories, like getting into where we are today in the field of sexuality, and then our own experiences when how it coincides with like psychedelic use, but or healing. But one of my questions for you is how do you see these containers where people are bringing psychedelics to sexual healing, as like, why is it beneficial? How do psychedelics complement that or even enhance the sexual healing that can happen outside of the psychedelic realm?
Yeah. Okay. So this is such a loaded question. We can spend time just answering just this one question, because I think it touches on so many things. So psychedelics I see as this powerful avenue for redefining what sex is. We've been conditioned, and you all both work with people and helping them to expand the definition of what sex is. We've been taught that it's penetration focus, it's orgasm focus, you're focused on the partner and getting them off. It's all, friction oriented and performance based. And then when you go into a psychedelic experience, you can realize, and this is even from the research I've been gathering. I've been gathering phenomenological data from people who were doing this for themselves and finding that people are discovering that sex can be energetic. It can be this energetic experience of exchange between two people. There can be a deep meditation and a dissolution of the boundaries between them, the other person, and the world. They can feel like with MDMA is a really good example of this, that you follow pleasure instead of chasing for the orgasm. So it becomes like pleasure as this compass rather than being fixated on, am I performing correctly or am I getting myself off or them off from a genital perspective. And then also it moves it away from the genitals so that you can fall into just like, oh, my whole body is orgasmic, or my elbow is orgasmic, or, like something not traditional can be orgasmic. And so what I see is it creates these reference points for us in the complexity of what sex is, because there's so many components that make a good sexual experience. And then we can use that as a reference point outside of the sexual or the psychedelic experience, as in like implement the practices that help us to be able to go back and achieve that. And I like to talk about one of my very first experiences with ayahuasca. I think this was like 10 years ago. And I went into the bathroom and looked into the mirror, and I just fell in love with the adorableness of myself. Like I sat there and I was like squishing my chubby cheeks, and I was like playing with my eyelashes. I was like, oh my God, I'm so adorable, and that really anchored into this embodied experience of what self-love was, and in Tantra, I remember one of my teachers, Charles Muir, when he was having us practice Tantra and eye gazing with somebody, he would say, connect to the adorableness of this other person. And in those practices with him, it was this expansion and then just this softness of like love, like, oh my God, you're adorable type of love. And here I felt that in this ayahuasca experience. And I was like, oh shit, damn. I'm sharing these memes on Instagram saying like, self-love yourself, and like so much everybody else is too, like just love yourself. But that is such a complex concept for people to reach. If you don't know where you're going, if you don't know what it is that you're trying to experience, it's a very intellectual concept until you understand the embodied sense of it. So I see that with psychedelics, like the concept of surrender. Like you can feel what surrender is and like what it is to actually let go in that space, or you're in a terrible like panic state and uncomfortable, same with self-love, same with, embodiment or disembodiment. We talk about these things, but we don't realize they're intellectual until that point.
Mhm.
Is that what led you? So I love that you mentioned ayahuasca, but I was wondering what led you to primarily focus you're practicing something that's taking psychedelics and sex, right? And commingling those things, which I think is incredible. And recreationally, I've done that, right? But I love that you practice. So what led you to want to specialize in this amazing and vast world?
Yeah. So my background, I've been a sex therapist for 13 years. I dove into Tantra and BDSM very early on. That was like, I think 13 years ago, I started with Tantra and BDSM 10 years ago. So I had a lot of that background, and realizing that sex was psychedelic, even before I was, regularly getting into psychedelics, or more seriously, more intentionally getting into psychedelics. I was like, wow, you can enter into these trance states and these altered states of consciousness, like, by being tied up and suspended from, the rafters, like what? And then the psychedelic work, I started, going to ceremonies and going deep into the ceremony work. And I also have a background in Reiki energy. So understanding even these out of the box concepts of healing and like of what's possible in the body and in the mind and the psyche. So it was, some of these ayahuasca ceremonies that I really got to heal some of my sexual trauma from my childhood and then my early adult years, and getting to see how dissociated I was, that I wasn't able to see, even though I was in therapy myself. Like I wasn't able to see that I was not fully there most of the time, or because being able to let go, or pleasure in the body and orgasms in the body. So that was really helpful. And then it was 3.5 years ago, I started studying the ketamine work, and because that's what's legal, and then going into that route, studying MDMA therapy with MAPS, and then just really diving into understanding the complexity of all of these different types, and learning that psychedelics can be erotic. I think people oftentimes think like mushrooms, they just make me go into my head and then I can't, like, whatever. I just want to work on things in my head, want to be antisocial. But this, tying the kink and tying the tantric principles into the experience, I've developed a model called erosynthesis that teaches people how to have these erotic experiences. And it's powerful for both in a psychedelic experience, but then also as an integration tool. And it uses breath, and it uses the concept of like a self-container and like a partner container, so that and body movement and sounds and even visualizing things to be able to invoke and sublimate or draw up that energy that and rather than it being localized to just the genitals.
Well, that was fun. Thanks for tuning in, lovers. And if you want to experience more ecstasy and sexual liberation, head over to sexlovepsychedelics.com and learn about how you can join me for any one of my online or live events. And while you're there, grab my free guide on sex and psychedelics. Remember, this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Please contact your healthcare provider and local law before pursuing any of the products or psychedelics discussed. And one final note here. I make this show specifically for you. If you're loving the show, then be sure to leave me a review in iTunes or Spotify to let me know. Happy to be here and happy to serve. I'll see you next time on Sex Love Psychedelics.